Hello students, today we are going to deal with the poem Ozymandias by P.B. Shelley. This is a poem of the great romantic poet who became very famous with his lyrics. P.B. Shelley, the famous poet among the romantics, states the view that the glory of the erstwhile ruler Ozymandias has ebbed over a period of time. Since mortality is the law of nature, nothing is permanent. The glory and splendor of Ozymandias may be non-existent, but the fact remains that the art remains. He was a glorious king, a powerful monarch. Now, with the passage of time, his statue lies in a state of desolation and ruin. Nothing remains. Certain characteristics can be noted clearly. A look of contempt and disdain is there on the face of Ozymandias. The statue lies dismembered in a totally shattered state. There was a time when Ozymandias had looked down with disdain upon one and all. There was a scowl on his face. However, due to mortality, everything changed. Just as monuments lie in a state of desolation, so also the glory of the erstwhile ruler has vanished. The main theme of the poem goes to show that while life is temporary, art is perennial. Art is forever. The artist is remembered for eternity. The process of annihilation has begun. The statue of Ozymandias lies dismembered, yet the beauty and the finer aspects of art remain. P.B. Shelley was born the only son into a titled family in Sussex in 1792. He was educated at Eton, where the tyrannical system suppressed him. He was sent to Oxford University, and he was known for his atheism, and for some time when he was young he was a thorough rebel. The university authorities did not approve of his attitude, and he and Thomas Jefferson Hogg were friends who protested together against the system. Shelley's personal life was also sad. He and his father did not get along, and he was quite unhappy. There was a strained relationship between him and his father, and it remained throughout his life. However, Shelley was highly creative. He is known as the lyrical poet. For example, in Prometheus Unbound, he has shown the independence of the fiery spirit. Shelley was also influenced by Godwin. Shelley had a very sad personal life. There was a lot of discord in his marriage. However, as all creative people have very discordant lives, so also did Shelley. Yet, his poetry is unsurpassed. When Shelley was young, he read several Gothic novels with great relish. His taste was rather crude. He preferred to read plays. He read dramas. He was an admirer of Sophocles, of Shakespeare, Calderon, and Goethe. Due to his competence in several languages, he was able to take equal delight in Homer as well. The label most commonly used by literary historians to designate the age in which Shelley lived is romantic. However vague and ambiguous his writing may appear, it does point out that he was an excellent romantic. The romantic movement developed at the end of the 18th century, and within a generation it affected the literature written all over Europe. There were many tendencies in romantic poetry. Some of the people considered that the poems were egocentric. Maybe they were, but they were highly creative as well. Some of them bordered on the bizarre, on the extraordinary, and yet there was a freshness of individualism. There was a certain perception marked among the romantics, and slowly and steadily the people, the critics, they appreciated Shelley's works. P.B. Shelley is considered one of the finest among the romantics. He was a visionary and a philosopher. He wanted to have a perfect society. He was utopian in his vision. He had many dreams and he wanted to fulfill them at any cost. He wanted a better world, a beautiful world. He has written poems like Ode to the West Wind, which show his autobiographical streak. Ode to a Skylark is another beautiful lyrical poem. The Romantics believed in the concept of beauty, of life's transitory nature, and they were fascinated with the unknown and the unfamiliar. Shelley has been considered by many critics as a beautiful and ineffectual angel, according to Matthew Arnold, beating in the void his luminous wings in vain. His poetry was brave, sincere, and tender. His mind had been fed on the marvels of the popular romances. Shelley was solitary in his appearance and manners. He was a quick learner, a voracious reader, and maybe some people felt that he had an eccentric individuality. He was a genius. He had strong likes and dislikes. He had studied at Eton. He had a well-informed mind. By the time he went to Oxford in 1810, his character had already been formed. He had fixed opinions, and due to his rebellious nature, he was expelled. He was a nonconformist by nature and highly poetic. His views on religion were also utterly contrary to the popular beliefs. Now students, let us take a look at the sonnet form. There are two kinds of sonnets, the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan. The word sonnet has been derived from the Italian sonetto. It means little song or little sound. The poem we are dealing with is an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, which starts with rhyming words in the pattern of R-I-M-A-B-A-C-I-A-T-A. This is called a kissing rhyme, which in English we call an envelope rhyme. It ends with a sestet in chained rhyme, which can use a variety of sequences. The poem Ozymandias is a Petrarchan sonnet, a sonnet of 14 lines, which ends with a sestet, the last two lines, the couplet. It is a brief, meaningful poem. It has serious overtones to it. It is about Ozymandias, the glorious ruler of an erstwhile empire. I am reading the poem now. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." This poem was composed in 1817 and published first in 1818. The poem Ozymandias is a sonnet which describes the erstwhile grandeur and arrogance of a bygone era. The poet narrator, the persona, tells us about the tale of a traveller who had unearthed certain facets. The shattered statue of Ozymandias lies in a state of ruin. In the desert, one can see the dismembered statue of Ozymandias. Ozymandias was an arrogant emperor who considered the world to be his footstool. Remember Tamburlaine, Marlowe's hero? He too thought the world was his footstool. The sheer contemptuous look on Ozymandias' visage shows us that there was a sneer of cold command. Those days, people believed in the divine right of kings. Kings thought They were superior to the others and they ruled the world. Ozymandias was one such king. He did not know the meaning of failure. But what happened to him? He died. He perished like an ordinary mortal. And then, what was remembered? Nobody remembered Ozymandias, but the artist, the sculptor who made the statue of Ozymandias, who depicted the statue of Ozymandias, he is remembered. Therefore, art is permanent, art is perennial, art is forever, not life. Life surely perishes. We return into the dust. Ozymandias was so proud and arrogant that on his epitaph, these were the words, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Ozymandias considered himself to be God. There was no punishment for him. There was nothing for him. Yet death came and claimed him, because death is the leveler. All the arrogance and the vanity came to naught. Now what is visible? In the stark desert, what is visible is the dismembered statue of Ozymandias. Therefore, no mortal escapes death. Let us remember this. Ozymandias, the powerful ruler who ruled by divine right, now does not exist. Nobody even remembers him. Such is life. Now, I shall give you an explanation of the poem in detail. Firstly, let us remember, students, that when you write an answer, you are supposed to say, the poet narrator. The poet narrator explains. The poet narrator says. You don't say, P.B. Shelley says. Please remember this. The poet narrator is the persona, the actual one who narrates the vision of the poet. Here, the poet narrator begins by saying that he came across a traveler from an ancient land. And what did that traveler tell him? The traveler had discovered certain facets in the desert, in the stark, lone, bare desert. He had seen two vast and trunkless legs of stone, and there lay the statue of Ozymandias, which had been sculpted in clay. It lay broken and dismembered, shattered into bits. The once contemptuous king, the once disdainful monarch, now lay there, utterly bereft of his glory. There was a frown on his face, and he had a haughty attitude, an authoritative attitude symbolic of the divine right of kings. Of course, on the visage, there was a sneer of cold command. The sculptor, the painter who had depicted the statue, read the passions rather well. And today, we remember Ozymandias as a vain and glorious king who had ruled by divine right. Yet, what is the poet trying to tell us? The poet P.B. Shelley, like all other romantic poets, tells us that life is transitory, impermanent. It will perish. Life perishes. Nothing remains. All of us die. Yet what remains is art, because art is forever. Art is perennial. Art is eternal. And therefore, life appears dull and futile. What we leave behind is imprints on the sands of time. That is all. Once upon a time, Ozymandias had many followers, many worshippers, many admirers, many sycophants. He was a grand king, a glorious king who ran an empire. People were not his true friends, but they were his sycophants. They flattered him, because that is what is done when there are kings around. However, Ozymandias' pride was a little too much, bound to be. And Ozymandias, after he died, on the epitaph, there were certain words. I'm emphasizing the words. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Here these lines indicate blasphemy. Ozymandias was blasphemous in his attitude. He did not even worship the Almighty like all other mortals. The Almighty did not exist for him perhaps. Yet today his statue lies there in a dismembered state. Who remembers Ozymandias? No one. But the artist is remembered. Therefore, now we see decay, desolation, ruin, calamity, disaster, call it by whichever name, and there we see the bare desert across which the statue of Ozymandias lies in a terrible ruinous condition. It is pathetic, but well then, that is how human life is. While we are alive, we are arrogant. While we are alive, we are vain, and everything goes back into the dust. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. That is the story and the saga of human life. Now let me explain the detailed meanings through which the poem will be made more clear. Let us be explicit. Trunkless legs of stone refers to the totally broken statue of Ozymandias. The trunk has been severed from the other part of the body, and there it lies, the statue in the desert. Visage, V-I-S-A-G-E. Visage is a French word which means countenance, face. The expression on the face of Ozymandias. The wrinkled lip suggests a sneer, and sneer of cold command depicts authority. The sculptor definitely read the passions well. He sculpted the statue in such a way that all the sentiments and the characteristic features of Ozymandias came alive. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, this refers to the sycophants who were eternally present in the life of Ozymandias the ruler. When a king is powerful, he has many sycophants, flatterers, who are always around him. They are artificial, they are evil because they have their own needs. They are not his true friends. An emperor never has true friends. And on the pedestal, these words appear. Pedestal, the epitaph. On the epitaph, these words appear. I am repeating again. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Ozymandias declares again and again that he is the monarch. Look on my words, ye mighty, and despair. He even is blaspheming against God. He is such an evil king that he is blaspheming against God, God the Almighty. He does not acknowledge the power of God. Towards the end of the poem, these lines can be read and remembered. The lone and level sands stretch far away. What does this indicate? The reader realizes that perhaps the sand is more vast now than the empire is. The empire has been shattered because of mortality. The law of mortality is such that everything perishes. The Romantic poets were also considered pessimists by some of the critics. But they were not pessimists. They were people who looked at life with a different perspective. The perspective was romantic, ephemeral, ethereal, beautiful. The law of life indicates that there is uncertainty in everything that we do. The very fact that we are born, we know that we are going to perish. Nothing is forever. The glory of Ozymandias was once distinct. He was worshipped literally because he was a powerful monarch. But now his time is over. Time and tide wait for no man. Time is such that we all surrender to the hands of fate, to destiny. It was the destiny of Ozymandias to perish. He had to perish. And during the time that he lived, he was a vain and arrogant king, a powerful emperor, but one who was in love with himself, like all egocentric rulers. Now let me explain to you the meaning of egocentric. An egocentric person is an individual who is obsessed with himself, his desires, his aspirations. He does not see the world around him. He does not care. For him, everyone is secondary. He is primary. He does not realize his mistakes. He is too ambitious, maybe. The very ambitious, the overly ambitious can be called the overreachers. Maybe he is an overreacher. He definitely is. That's why he did not see the future. He was not humble. Humility was not one of his virtues. That is the aspect which has to be first remembered. And let us remember that this beautiful sonnet, this beautiful Italian sonnet, which Shelley has brought to us, gives us a serious aspect into life. Life is steady, unsteady. There are phases, and everything perishes in the end. That is the main fact we have to remember. And as we remember, we should be humble. Ozymandias was not humble at all. As I told you earlier, Marlowe's Tamburlaine also showcases such a personality. Christopher Marlowe wrote a play called Tamburlaine, and in that also a glorious king is depicted. The glorious king considered the world to be his footstool, and his empire also flourished but then perished. And therefore, it is important for us to remember the law of mortality. However, all mortals have certain weaknesses. Ozymandias had his own. He was full of ambition, power. He sought power. He wanted to rule. And therefore, we cannot call him humble by any means. Very few kings were humble. In conclusion, let me say a few lines about Ozymandias the ruler. There are certain characteristics which have been highlighted here, such as ambition, pride, and absolute power. Pride goeth before a fall, such is the proverb. And what does it tell us? It tells us that pride and arrogance both are negative qualities. They can lead to despair. The moral that we learn from this poem is that mortality is viewed from a philosophical stance. All that is evil perishes, all that is good perishes, yet the good is remembered. Evil is redundant. Therefore, dear students, let us learn a moral. The moral is that humility is a must in contrast to the negative aspect of pride. The erstwhile sovereign Ozymandias wanted power, power to control, power to destroy. That is not the true meaning of power, dear students. Ambition is good. Ambition is aspiring towards some goal, striving for perfection. But in a case like Ozymandias, he strove for himself. He was thoroughly egocentric, like another strong character portrayed in Robert Browning's poem. If you remember the poem My Last Duchess, it tells us about the character of the Duke of Ferrara, who was exactly like Ozymandias. The Duke of Ferrara was an ambitious man, a man who wanted to control the universe. Morally, it is not right. Yet there are people like that in society. Society is made up of all kinds. Therefore, the mental makeup of a person is important. Maybe some of these kings, these monarchs, they were people who were full of perversions. They were not very normal. We cannot call them abnormal, but they were too ambitious in the wrong direction. Ambition is definitely good, but it is not ambition to destroy and to control.